Proposed bill in Massachusetts would fine landlords if their tenants use drugs on the property and make landlords pay for any police response to the property. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's coming out of the state of Massachusetts, and it has to do with this new proposed law, or actually it's two laws, right, that force landlords to have to pay for the cost of any police response to a property, or force a landlord to pay fines if their tenants are using drugs on a property. Now, I've heard of laws similar to this. This is like crime-free housing laws, okay? Now, I didn't expect this sort of law to be put into place in a place like Massachusetts because it's a far left-leaning place. And in these sort of places, it seems odd that they suddenly want to penalize a landlord for doing something that they approve of. Okay, they approve of open air drug use. They think that the tenant is an innocent victim. But then again, you think about it and they're like, oh yeah, the landlord has money. Let's use the landlord in order to basically prop up our shortcomings when it comes to our budget for the city. Okay, they're going to fine a bunch of good landlords, a whole bunch of fines because their tenants are breaking the law or committing a lot of crime or calling the police a lot, and that's a ridiculous joke. Okay, if anything, they should be fining those tenants. Okay, if a tenant is using drugs, then maybe the tenant should pay a fine. If the tenant is calling the police a lot, maybe the tenant should pay for that. But no, they want to fine the landlord, of course. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So, do you think it's fair? Do you think this is a fair law? Do you think that the landlord should be held responsible for those tenants, as though somehow we were forcing their hand and forcing them to be a disturbance and use drugs and all that? Okay, I've had tenants before who have used drugs, okay, and it isn't my fault. I didn't know they were going to use drugs. Sometimes people fall into addictive habits, and it's unfortunate, but it should not be placed, the blame should not be placed on the landlord. It should be placed on the person who is doing the crime. That's one of those things that I hate, when they say, we're going to blame this other person over here for something that this person did. That's stupid, okay? Personal responsibility. The people committing the crimes or committing the acts are the ones. They're the problem, not the landlord. Anyway, let me get into this article and tell you what it says. This article is coming from FallRiverReporter.com, and it says, Democrat bills would punish Massachusetts landlords for crimes their tenants commit. Let's get into it. Two proposed bills in the Massachusetts legislature would place significant financial responsibilities on landlords for tenant drug-related issues and police responses, even when landlords are not directly involved. These bills aim to address public safety, but raise concerns about fairness and property management challenges. HB 1901, fining landlords for tenant drug use. House Bill 1901 would impose fines on landlords if tenants use or store illegal drugs on their properties, regardless of whether the landlord is aware of the activity. This measure seeks to curb drug-related issues in rental properties by holding property owners accountable. Critics argue penalizing landlords without their knowledge is unjust and could discourage property investment or lead to overly intrusive tenant monitoring. Supporters claim it incentivizes landlords to maintain safer properties, though the bill's lack of clarity on enforcement or landlord protections remains contentious. So let's talk about this very first bill, okay? So they're going to fine a landlord if a tenant uses or stores drugs on a property. Now, how in the world would a landlord know? And what are we talking about in terms of drugs, okay? Are we talking about illegal drugs only? Or are we talking about things that are kind of quasi-legal, such as marijuana? I don't know. There's no clarification here in this article, at least, okay? The real question is it fair? Is it fair to go out and blame a landlord, fine a landlord for something that your tenant is doing? Without your knowledge, by the way, on top of that, because I'm pretty sure that most leases like mine say, hey, no illegal drugs on my property. Okay, so I put in my lease no illegal drugs. Tenants still could be using drugs. Not, it's not like they're going to come and tell you. And then you end up with a fine. And I don't know how much the fine is going to be. It could be hundreds of dollars, it could be thousands of dollars. Doesn't matter. You shouldn't have to pay a penny. Okay. Oh man, I find a big issue with the way that government works, where they punish the law abiding and then they reward the people who are breaking the law. Okay? These people who are using drugs, they don't go after them. Oh, we don't want to find people for being addicts, but we will find this landlord for allowing that addict to live there. So the other issue I have is, right, if you're telling us that we can't have these sort of people on our properties to try to keep them safe, is there a quick and easy method to remove them from your properties? And I already know the answer to this. We're talking about Massachusetts here. No, okay? The eviction process is slow and it's going to cost you a lot of money, period. So they expect you to get rid of these bad tenants through a slow, inefficient process that strongly favors the tenant. You could have, on one hand, the city fining you for having drugs on your property and causing problems, right? And then on the other hand, the city or county telling you, no, you cannot evict them. You have to allow them to stay in there and continue to use drugs, and you have to continue to accumulate those fines. Okay? That's how ridiculous this whole situation is. Now let's get into the second law that they proposed. HB 2246, Landlord Liability for Police Responses. House Bill 2246 goes further, making landlords financially responsible for the cost of police responses to their properties, no matter who initiates the call or the reason behind it. This could include incidents ranging from domestic disputes to noise complaints, even if the landlord has no control over the situation. Proponents argue that this bill encourages landlords to screen tenants more carefully and address issues proactively. However, opponents warn that it could unfairly burden landlords with unpredictable costs, particularly in high crime areas, and may deter property owners from renting to certain tenants or operating in vulnerable neighborhoods. Absolutely. Okay? That sort of thing will absolutely deter people from wanting to invest in lower income areas. And they're going to definitely increase their screening criteria in order to minimize the number of problems that they have on their property. So what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of tenants who are having a lot more difficulty in finding housing. And the housing they do find is going to cost a bit more because they have to raise the cost. They absolutely have to because of the new criteria. So, it works in terms of if you want less problems on individual properties, it might work. But these people got to live somewhere. And I think that it isn't the fault of the landlord that they are calling the police a lot. Okay, this is something that is completely out of their control, and the thought of forcing the landlord to pay that amount. If you have a single tenant who is calling 911 or calling for emergencies too often, or for things that aren't emergencies, right, and asking for police response, then maybe you should go after that single tenant and not after the property owner. The property owner does not have control over what these tenants do. Okay, I mean, unless you are literally, chaining them down and then controlling every move they make. You cannot control whether they use drugs. You cannot control whether they commit crime. You cannot control anything about them. Yet that is what they seem to be implying that we should be able to do. Okay? And that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Implications and debate. Both bills reflect a push to enhance community safety but place landlords in a challenging position, holding them accountable for tenant actions they may not be able to prevent. Landlords already face responsibilities under Massachusetts law to maintain safe property, such as complying with the state sanitary code and addressing known risks. These new proposals, however, expand liability significantly, potentially increasing financial risks and operational burdens. Critics, including groups like Anti-Woo Coalition, argue that the bills punish landlords for crimes that they didn't commit, while supporters see them as tools to deter illegal activity and reduce strain on public resources. And I understand the desire to reduce the strain on these public resources. I do. Okay? And it truly is a burden when you have a very, very small segment of the population who uses a lot of resources, be it police or fire or emergency response or whatever, or a single small portion of the population that uses drugs and causes the associated problems. But these are societal issues, and these are also issues of personal responsibility. This isn't something where, simply put, you can come in there and find the landlord and then suddenly this problem disappears. No, it might move somewhere else. Even if the landlord evicts these people, they are going to move somewhere else. And where are they going to move? Well, they might end up only being able to find a place outside of, the state of Massachusetts, but they're going to find a place. So what do you think? Do you think these laws work? Do you think these laws are good? Do you think they will help the state of Massachusetts or help landlords? Put a comment in the comment section down below.